Good evening and welcome to the Utopian Baseball Universe. This is the Atlanta Braves team preview show. For everyone that was in the group last year and for maybe some people that joined within the last 6 weeks and have been following the posts, the Braves were and are our inaugural champions. The Braves beat the Reds last year in the first ever Utopian Baseball Universe Championship Series in a best of 7. They won it in 5. They didn't even win their division last year. They were a wild card team. They beat the Astros in the South Division wild card. They swept the Royals in the South Division Championship Series. They beat the Dodgers in 7 at the table, which is our Final Four. And they beat the Reds in the championship in 5 games. This team was 10th in pitching last year, 5th in hitting. And as you'll see later when we reveal the roster, they look to be very strong this year as well. This is our last scheduled team preview. We had one rain out, so tomorrow at noon we will be doing our Texas Rangers show with Nate Miller. But tonight it is the Atlanta Braves. It is our champions, and it is our guest, Jerry Grillo. So I'll bring Jerry on here in a minute. Jerry, welcome.
Hi there. Hi, Joey.
Hey, Jerry. So Jerry is obviously a big Braves fan. Jerry, let the viewers know how you became a fan. Early on, how you became a fan. Share some of your early Braves memories with us.
Sure. Oh, glad to. Thank you. Well, I'll tell you, I've been a Braves fan most of my life. I'm actually born in New York, so that might sound kind of funny, but I moved south at a very young age. I was 6 when we moved to Florida, and we did have some spring training there, but the closest baseball team, major league team, was the Atlanta Braves, and we used to see them on TBS, and of course we soon moved to Atlanta from Florida, so we were in the Atlanta area. So there we were, and they became my team. And I guess in 1972 we moved to Atlanta. So since then I've been a pretty diehard Braves fan. Even when I worked in New York I was at a newspaper in a sports department, and my buddies used to tease me all the time and say, "Jerry, why do you like the Braves? Why do you like the Braves?" They were all Mets and Yankees guys, and anyway, all that to say is, I've been a diehard, not diehard enough to say that I'm any kind of expert. I have had years where I have been an expert, especially when I've been working as a sports writer, when I knew everything I needed to know. And then there have been years when I've been a much more casual fan. But in the end, I always check the standings and see how they're doing and, live and die with them. That's the bottom line.
Did you ever get a chance? So you said you moved there in 72. Did you get a chance to see Henry Aaron play?
I sure did. I was going to say one of my some of my fondest memories was seeing Henry Aaron in the old Atlanta, the launching pad, Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. And I know I saw him one home run there. But what was really the most memorable was a game in which we all anticipated a home run that did not come, or we all hoped for. It was the end of the 1973 season. Hank had been, he was chasing Babe Ruth furiously. I mean, Henry was 39 at the time, right? Old for baseball, in baseball years for many people, but he hit 40 home runs that year. Hit in like less than 400 at bat. I mean, it was some ridiculous number. He was really on. And so my father had tickets for the last game of the season, and he had 713. And so we thought, well, last game of the season, he's going to tie it. We know it. Well, I think he went 1 for 3 or something with a walk and a single. And I don't think he came particularly close to hitting one out, but I tell you, I still get chills when I think of the standing ovation he got at the end of the game, at the end of his last at bat. I mean, we were standing up and people were, the place was packed, and Atlanta Stadium didn't get packed a lot back then, except when Henry Aaron was chasing Babe Ruth, right? I mean, a lot of times you went to games and, there were a couple of thousand of your good friends there. But in those years, they were pretty crowded because everybody was anticipating. And even Henry, who God rest his soul. So sorry he's gone. And I had the pleasure to meet him later on in work as I was writing a story for actually a business magazine, and it was a business story because he was quite a businessman. Henry Aaron was one of those guys, and you didn't know it as a kid. You didn't care. You just cared that the guy could play ball. He was actually a brilliant guy. He obviously had a baseball IQ that was, probably second to none. And he was soft spoken. He didn't say a lot. And but as he got older and he got into business, you started to see the success this man was. Anyway, that's my Henry Aaron jibe. But yeah, I got to see him, and he became one of my favorites. Willie Mays and Henry Aaron. I have to say Henry because Henry preferred. That was the name he preferred. So I'm trying to train myself to remember him as Henry Aaron. So Dusty Baker, Ralph Garr were some of my favorites. Phil Niekro was one of the few hopes we had in the pitching on the pitching staff. Except we had Carl Morton for a few years, who was a great pitcher, at least a solid pitcher, 16 game winner. Guys like Morton and Niekro in those years, if they had been playing, say, for Oakland or for say Cincinnati, or the teams that were winning pennants, these guys would have been 20 game winners. That meant a lot more back then. But these were effective pitchers, so those were good days. The Braves were usually mediocre at best. You're wearing the perfect hat for that, actually, Joey. I just wanted to say that's the hat I remember seeing a number of years there at Atlanta Stadium. And so those were great. And listening to the games at, Summers, I'm making myself sound like my father or grandfather or something, but we used to listen to Milo Hamilton and Ernie Johnson on the radio. They were unbelievable. And then Skip Carey coming along, who was just hilarious. I mean, Skip was so caustic to Ernie Johnson's good-natured attitude. And then Pete Van Wieren is sort of the umpire who was Mr. Egghead, knew everything about baseball. These guys, this was the soundtrack of, a number of summers for me, on the radio, because we went to a handful of games a year, anyway.
So when I was a kid, and I think I've shared the story before, but you and I get into talking yesterday. The reason I became a Mets fan in 1984 was the day we got cable. The cable guy actually highlighted all the games in the guide, and it was Cubs, Braves, Mets, Cubs, Braves, Mets. Well, the Cubs didn't have lights at Wrigley yet, so Graham and I would watch the Cubs every day. 120 home games. Mm-hmm. And then my grandma said, the Braves kind of broke our heart in 1965 when they left, so I don't want to watch any Braves games. So what I did was her and I would watch the Cubs, and then I would watch the Mets on evenings and weekends, and then I would kind of secretly get my fix of Braves games. She was, sleeping or whatever, like if you're West Coast. And I love that booth that you had just mentioned with Chip Carey, Pete Van Wieren. Don Sutton was in that booth for yes. I forgot to mention Don Sutton came along later. Joe Simpson, all great. I mean, and Don, I was a real favorite too. I thought he brought. It was interesting when Don came, and you're right. That was a long time ago. They had a 4-person. Well, because then again, Ernie retired, and when Ernie retired, I was just looking for something. Ernie retired, and then you had Don and Skip and Pete, and then Joe joined them, and that was for years. They had just a first class. But then I lived in New York for a while. We moved back when I was, 19, 20, and lived in Chicago for a while. So it's funny how you collect teams when you move around. And so when I lived in Chicago for a year, I became a fan of the Cubs and the White Sox. I mean, the Braves, it always came down to the hierarchy. Like, well, if they met in the World Series, who would I root for? Well, the Braves, but the White Sox, I started liking them, and then moved back to New York for a few years where I met my second half, and became a fan of the Mets and the Yankees. And there aren't many of those. Most people in New York, like you like one or the other, they hate each other. But because I hadn't really grown up in New York, and I have cousins and family who are fans of both, I kind of like them both.
Plus, I always kind of had a soft spot for the Mets because Mays played for them, and I always when the Giants traded Willie to the Mets, I became a big Mets fan for a couple of years, and it stayed that way. You know, for years I always looked at what they were doing, but if they were playing the Braves, sorry, I know you love the Mets, but I was like, come on, Braves. And as you know, Chipper Jones, I think, kind of loved playing the Mets, didn't he?
Well, he performed so well at Shea Stadium that he named his child Shea.
Yes, I love that, and that's such a baseball thing because, you know, the New York fans also, being probably the smartest, you know, maybe the smartest fans in baseball in many ways. You know, it's that New York vibe. They recognize class, I think, or at least in a ball player when they see it. I don't know anything about Chipper's private life or whatever, but as a player on the field, he was a class act, and I think they appreciated that too. Even when they mocked him, you know, calling him Larry or whatever, you know, that's part of the game, and it reminds me of the stories that we've heard about Stan Musial going to Brooklyn when he was a Cardinal, and the Dodger fans hated the Cardinals, but they're the ones who they respected Stan Musial. They nicknamed him the man, and so, you know, it's just an interesting dynamic. Sometimes the guy who you hate to see come up to bat, you still kind of take your hat off to him.
So, do you remember? I think the year was 74, so it would have been before I was born. But do you remember kind of exactly where you were when Henry Aaron broke the home run record?
I sure do. I was in our family living room. Or den, whatever it was called, where the TV was, with my brother and sister. Probably 2 brothers and 1 sister were there, and I'm pretty sure because it was a weeknight, and I'm pretty sure my dad was out of town, so he wasn't with us, but we were on the phone shortly after, and yeah, we were watching it, waiting for it, Yep, I totally remember that, and it was anticipating everybody. All the people I knew were rooting for him, and I know and Henry Aaron would have told you that was the majority years later, because I know it hurt him, that the vitriol that he faced from probably a relative few but dangerously hateful people. You know, enough letters that he had. Enough of them to show that really you can understand why it bugged him for so long. But, I remember talking with him and hearing other interviews. He said, mostly what I got was, people in the stands were for him. And so that kind of stuff, I think it's why it was so shocking to him. It was kind of ugly, and it still breaks my heart today. There are times when if you could break down. I've read a number of biographies, and to think what he went through. And this is the thing about baseball, isn't it? I mean, you're up there facing a 95-mile-an-hour fastball with a round bat. It's the hardest thing in the world to do. And imagine in the back of your mind somewhere, you're like, I wonder if that guy really is going to kidnap my dog. I mean, how strong an individual does it take to take all of that in? So my respect for that guy, as a kid, I didn't understand it as much. As I've gotten older, my respect for him has just grown. I mean, really, it has. Henry Aaron's become one of my true heroes. And for the way he carried himself on the field and off the field, right? Because he was such a cool guy off the field as well. And you look at interviews now of him, and he's the quiet one out of the 4, but everybody's listening when he has something to say, So I'm an Aaron guy.
And just like you, I always refer to him as Henry Aaron because it just doesn't feel right for me to call this icon Hank.
And you know what? He even signed his autograph Hank. I mean, it's not like he signed it Henry. He didn't. I don't think he took umbrage to it. I think he preferred Henry. I think he had gotten used to Hank, and so it wasn't as to him. From what I understand, it wasn't as offensive thing to him, like, say, calling Roberto Bobby, unless you had, some people had, he did not mind, who was the great announcer for Pittsburgh, who he gave him permission to call him Bobby, basically. That was like the only guy, Roberto Clemente, wanted, if I understand the stories correctly, didn't mind, but he didn't like it. Like when Topps put Bob Clemente on his card, he says, "My name's Roberto," and whereas Henry Aaron, I don't think was as, he preferred Henry, but like I'm looking at a couple of his autographs that I have, and he signed them Hank, and I watched him. Well, the one I got when I was a kid is the one I watched him sign Hank. I've got his. He was all, like I said, I was a kid and it was impressionable, and so Henry has been a big part of my fandom.
Let me ask you this. So this question has been posed in the group in the last couple of weeks. Is Dale Murphy a Hall of Famer?
I'm going to vote with my heart on that and say yes. Because when you compare him to players of his time, if that's a metric of the Hall of Fame, I mean, if that's one metric anyway, then of the players of his contemporaries, I think he completely held his own and then some. He was one of the dominant players of his era. 2 Most Valuable Player awards, I think. A home run hitter. I mean, granted, his prime was a relatively short period, and that 399 career, I think it's 398 or 99 home runs is kind of nagging. And I think if he, because it's such a game of numbers and memories and that kind of thing, I feel like if he had 400 and something, probably because he was a star of the 80s, he would have been in. But then you think of another guy, Fred McGriff, 490 something home runs. If that guy had 500 something, he'd have been in a long time ago. I think. I don't know. I don't vote on that stuff, but he totally belongs. Fred, you look at McGriff's numbers as well. Anyway, yeah, but yeah, I'm sorry. That's my answer. I think Murphy belongs.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, back-to-back MVPs, 2 RBI crowns, multiple Gold Gloves. I think he was just a solid player.
Yeah.
Now, I know that the Braves only ended up getting 1 championship in that run in the 90s, but what are some of your favorite memories of those 90s teams?
Oh, man, I'll tell you, those were great years personally because in those years I was working as a sports writer on a little paper in Atlanta. And so we used to cover the Braves, and that was we would cover everything, the high schools to the pros. And so naturally we dug into Atlanta Stadium and then Turner Field. But mostly in the early years, of course, it was Atlanta Stadium. What I remember is I have some personal favorites. Mark Lemke, I was always a Lemke fan. I always liked him. Part of the reason I loved him and Glavine and Blauser, those 3, because I saw them as minor leaguers. When my wife and I were newlyweds, actually, at the time. We had moved to from New York. I was a sports editor at a little newspaper, and we went to watch some minor league ball in a small town in South Carolina, Sumter, South Carolina. Who's on this team but future Hall of Famer Tom Glavine, 19 years old. We didn't know who he was going to be, but I remember seeing him and writing about the game, of course, as a feature story for our little paper. But Glavine, Blauser, Lemke all played in that game. And then years later to see them succeed with the pennant-winning Braves was just such a joy. And then I guess, but the ultimate was the Francisco Cabrera, Sid Bream, 92. That's the highlight. And even the World Series is a highlight because I got to cover that and I was there when they did it. That's another category. That's otherworldly. But that pennant game, I was working that night. This was so cool, Joey. I'm working at a newspaper in Athens, Georgia, and it's a daily paper, and I was like the desk guy trying to put the pages together to get him onto the press. And of course, it's a night game, and that's like the last story we're waiting on. The University of Georgia basketball game was done. All of our other local major sports were done. It was Braves, all Braves, and we're all watching because we're all fans too. And there's just a few, like maybe 6 or 7 guys in the big newsroom just trying to put the paper to bed when that play happens. And we all just scream. And I'll never forget the night editor. He was kind of like the boss of the staff at night. Leapt onto the top of his desk and did a jig. I mean, he was on top of he just leapt from flat feet and was like, it was just, tie and everything. It was just brilliant. And so I actually have a picture of Sid Bream sliding that I took from the newspaper that night. It was a color separation that AP sent across, but it looks like a black and white photo of Sid sliding. So that might be my personal favorite just moment. But being at those games was magic, and then seeing Turner Field open, that was a lot of fun. It was heartbreak to see the Yankees come in and crush the Braves 3 straight at home. The Yankees were a great team, though, so it was, a lot of fun, man. Those were fun years.
Tell us more, if you'd like to, about your time writing about baseball.
Well, let me tell you, this is an interesting thing. When I was a younger guy, I was a sports writer and sports editor, and I just always loved, that was what I thought I was always going to want to do. And so for a number of years, it was a great thing. Anytime I could cover a major event, something that was more for fun, because mostly I stayed out in the boonies. Even now, I live out in the country in the mountains. I kind of like the country and the small town life, but I also like a taste of the big leagues once in a while. And so I was able to score, press passes. And so I used them. My colleagues and I would take turns, and we'd go write about the Braves. It might be a feature story, go into the locker room and find out why Mark Lemke likes fishing or something, and it didn't, because we were going to get the AP story on the game that night anyway. So we were going to have all that. So we would do the color, and except during the playoffs, we would go crazy, and a couple of us would go, and one guy would write the game story, and another guy would write like the notebook, the accompanying, and we would be like the big leaguers. And it was just a lot of fun. And it was a joy because it was not the usual. I was never a full-time beat writer. I could see, and those guys who do it and keep doing it and love it, my hat's off to them, because they must truly love the job to do that. I think it must be one of the, more grueling. But one thing I have to say, the baseball writing and the baseball interest is what led me to meeting the guy I wrote the book about. Actually, we didn't talk about that much last night, but there's a real baseball connection between Colonel Bruce Hampton, the man I wrote the book about, who was famous as a band leader, and baseball. He was a baseball freak, and that's how we bonded. I was vaguely familiar with his music and became a fan the more I got to know him, but he was firing away baseball trivia questions. He was great with it. And he had some killer questions, and he knew the answers to. And I knew the answers to a lot of them. And so I think that kind of clicked, and we started talking, and we became friends. And then a few years after that, I asked him, hey, what about a biography? Because I got to know what a great career he'd had and the influence that he was in his world. And he was like, yeah, sure. But anyway, all that is to say, baseball has been a part. It's funny. It was at one time, it was a part of my life with work, and I kind of miss it now. I don't realize sometimes how good you have it when you have it. But I also know that I'm 60 now, so it would be tougher for me to keep up that schedule, because those guys are, they're beasts. And it used to be the baseball beat on a newspaper was the one that guys would fight for, right? And I think it might still be that way. I don't know, but I think it's a tough thing. I think you got to really love it. It's a different atmosphere. I went to a clubhouse. I might have told you this. I went to a clubhouse a couple of years ago to do a story. It was a freelance story about Jeff Francoeur, who had just become one of the #1 Fox guys for the Braves. Sad news for Joe Simpson, who went to the radio booth, but good news for Jeff Francoeur. So the magazine I was writing for did a feature on him, and I got to go. First time I've covered a Braves game in 25 years or so, and so 20 years at least, 23 years. So it had changed so much. It's that the clubhouse is like a golf private clubhouse. It's a clubhouse. It's beautiful. Lounge chairs, and I don't know if they each have a personal masseuse or what, but it was just such a cool atmosphere. I admired it, but it was tough to talk to the players. Like you couldn't just go out and approach Brian McCann and say, hey, Brian, let me ask you. It wasn't like it used to be, right? And which, I'm not saying that it was better or worse, but appreciate, as the writer, when I was working those beats or those gigs, I appreciated that. I appreciated, even especially as a writer who wasn't a regular, right? So if I was talking to Dave Justice, he only saw me, 10 times a year as a writer, as opposed to the guys he sees, 100 something times a year. So, but they were usually accessible. So I guess that's what I'm saying, a little more accessible. And that's not a complaint. I think that's probably been done for a reason, giving the players some space and some time to not be hounded by the media, right, or the press, whatever. But anyway, that opened my eyes too to realize, like, wait a minute, I don't think I'd want to do this job now.
Jerry, tell us about the book itself. It's called The Music and Mythocracy of Colonel Bruce Hampton, a basically true biography. For those maybe not familiar with him, tell us a little bit about Colonel Bruce Hampton and your process in writing this book.
Sure. Well, Colonel Bruce Hampton was he was a gentleman from Atlanta, lived most of his life in Atlanta. He was sort of an institution in Atlanta, like the Braves. In fact, a quick baseball connection, Colonel Bruce Hampton was at the first Major League Baseball game played in Atlanta Stadium. It was actually the year before the Braves came. It was a exhibition game with the Orioles. And one of his famous trivia questions was, who hit the first home run in Atlanta Stadium? Everybody says Henry Aaron. It was Tommy Aaron, his brother, in that game against the Orioles. But Colonel Bruce was also at the last game at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium when they lost to the Yankees. Colonel Bruce, that's not why I wrote the book about him. He was a musician who began his career in the 60s with a very influential Atlanta area band that was sort of a progressive, out there, almost jazz punk kind of, thing called the Hampton Grease Band. And they sort of made a name for themselves, and he was their front man. And the band was named after him. Not that he was the leader, but it was more of a collective, if anything. But he was learning, and he just went on to have a brilliant career to become a band leader. He learned a lot about how to perform, how to do, how to perform without having a lot of musical training. He would hire the best musicians and create the best bands, ultimately leading to the pinnacle, which would be a band called the Aquarium Rescue Unit, which was a band that existed in the early 90s for 4 or 5 years. They were very influential on the Horde tours, which were a national tour of what since become known as jam band music. So like Dave Matthews and Widespread Panic and Fish. Blues Traveler basically ran that event, which went on for a number of years. Well, the Bruce Hampton, Colonel Bruce, was one of the founders of that. He was the old guy in the room with all these young guys. When they threw the managers out, this was a completely artist planned event, these tours, this festival that they did around the country. And they threw the managers out. They wanted to create equitable, everybody got paid the same. But all of these bands, who have since become, super bands or very rich and famous, all saw Colonel Bruce's band as the best of the bunch. They would hang out on the side in the wings. Their mouths would be on the floor. These were all the best musicians. What Bruce did was he would create a place for some of the best musicians to play and cut their teeth. And these guys since go on to play with the Grateful Dead. His bass player is now with Dead and Company. He played with the Allman Brothers for about 10 or 15 years. His guitar player is playing with Widespread Panic. He's also played with the Grateful Dead and the Allman Brothers and a number of other bands. So this is what he did. He created a place, and he fought fame, which is why a lot of people may not have heard of him. He's sort of a cult figure, if you will, and very influential among musicians and among fans who he touched with his personal gestures of kindness. Right, he was very kind to his fans. He was known to guest birthdays on a whim. He was very good at that. He was part conjurer, part classic Southern storyteller. He knew everybody. You know, you think of a person in the music business, and they either knew Colonel Bruce or he knew them at some point in their lives. They've either crossed or worked together. He's just one of those guys. And I got to meet him by accident. And like I said, at a small music festival near where I live. And the more I got to know him, the more I thought, you've had it's like a Zelig type of career that he's had. In fact, that's not my line. It's another writer who I respect a lot and who actually was kind enough to, I used some of his material. I used a lot of resources. I did a lot of research for this book. Well, this guy wrote a great piece about Bruce about 20 years ago or so, and he referred to him as the Zelig of rock and roll music. And I thought that was great because it pretty much is. And Zelig, for people who haven't seen that, is that character from an old Woody Allen movie where he's a guy who appears in different places in history, and he meets everybody, presidents and kings, and Bruce is like that.
Last night after we talked, I listened to Music to Eat, which I think came out in 1971, and I enjoyed it. So I've actually queued up a bunch of his other stuff for the next couple nights. Nice. Jerry, where can we find your book?
Oh, thank you for asking. It's available at most of the usual places. I would start by the publisher is the University of Georgia Press. UGApress.org. You can order it directly from the publisher. You can certainly go to barnesandnoble.com, Amazon. I think bookshops.org is a good location for if you want to support independent booksellers. I think it's called bookshop.org. So it's at a number of places. And if you look up the Music and Mythocracy of Colonel Bruce Hampton, you'll see I've been surprised myself because this is my first book. And so it's interesting to see, oh, wow, look at where it's available. Sometimes in languages I can't really understand. But the book is, unfortunately, it's only printed in English right now. And but hopefully there'll be other language. If it becomes popular enough, we'll see where it goes from there. But Colonel Bruce was a one of a kind and a true baseball fan. So I think he would love this show, actually.
Well, we'll make sure after our show tonight to post within the group on where we can find that book. Jerry's going to stick around as we start to segue into the Braves roster for Utopian. Let's take a look actually real quick at the schedule. Now, again, this is the World Champions, so they're going to have a tougher schedule. They're going to open on the road actually against the Montreal Expos. Friday, March 26th against the Expos. Memorial Day, or actually their home opener is going to be against the Nationals. Memorial Day at Houston. Independence Day at Detroit. Labor Day at Tampa Bay. And then they actually finish the season on the road as well at Texas. So, the national games, if you will, are going to be tougher, but really looking forward to see if they can get a good start to defending the championship at the Expos on the 26th. So this is where, Bobby Cox, of course, called me today. And here is the lineup. Jerry hasn't seen this yet. I'll read it off. I'm going to also read off the bench players for the Braves, and then we'll get Jerry's reaction here. So here we go. Leading off and playing left field, Ronald Acuna Jr. Batting second, first baseman Freddie Freeman. Batting third baseman Eddie Matthews. Batting fourth, league MVP, home run champion, Utopian champion Henry Aaron, playing right field. Batting fifth, Dale Murphy in center. Batting sixth, Brian McCann catching. Batting seventh, Ozzie Albies at second. Shortstop and batting eighth, Rafael Furcal hit some big hits in the championship series last year. And then batting ninth and pitching for the second straight year, Warren Spahn. And then let's look at the bench. We've got Javi Lopez, Joe Adcock, Saul White, a Negro League Hall of Famer, joining this team in 2021. Chipper Jones, Johnny Logan, Andrew Jones, Ron Gant, and David Justice. So let's get Jerry's reaction to this, the position players for this Braves team.
I like this team, man. I think this team is well suited to defend its title. This is amazing. I love this team up and down the lineup, and for with my head and with my heart. I mean, Eddie Matthews. That's the one that surprised me because I wasn't. I don't know why I wasn't thinking that. I was thinking, certainly it doesn't surprise me that he's hitting in the third slot, but like on the team, I would think, okay, that's going to be Chipper Jones' slot or something. I'm glad you went with Eddie because you've got Henry hitting behind Eddie, which is something that he was used to for quite a while. And look at what they did in Milwaukee, man. So I think that's a fabulous lineup. I love that Freddie Freeman is in there at first because he's a personal favorite. I know he's my son's favorite. I took him to see the Braves a few years ago, and Freddie hit a home run. And so, that's like anything else, right? The guy you see hit a home run is the guy you love. And also we're big fans of Alvis and Acuna. We saw them we've seen them in the minor leagues. We used to go see a lot of games at Gwinnett to see the AAA Braves. And so this is and for Call too, that surprised me. That's a great pick. And Warren Spahn didn't shock me, but I was happy to hear the name anyway because, as you said, second year in a row, but it's the greatest lefty wins and durability ever played. And this bench, Adcock made me really smile. 4 home runs in a game, one of the few guys to do it, a true slugger, and a big guy, Saul White. This is a hell of a lineup. I'm good with this. I'm happy to put this against bring it on, Cincinnati.
Yeah, and this team beat the Reds last year in the championship, so let's see what can happen. This team could pitch last year too, so let's look at the rotation.
Yes.
And the bullpen for the Braves. Spahn gets the ball on opening day. Greg Maddux on Saturday. Kid Nichols, who was the Braves' best pitcher in September and October last year, a Boston Brave stalwart here. And then they're going to start a season. They're going to start a series with the Blue Jays on Monday. Lou Burdett, Phil Niekro, and then Warren Spahn again. Niekro last year had a Utopian record 29 consecutive shutout innings in, I think it was June, July of last year. So Niekro holds on to that 5 spot. Also making the roster are Tom Glavine and a Richie Lunt favorite, Max Fried.
Nice. Oh, I'm so glad Fried got on there because this is only going to help him. If you think about it, look at who he's pitching with. I mean, you got Lou Burdett, a master. You've got Kid Nichols for crying out loud. You've got he's got to be one of the winningest pitchers he's probably the winningest pitcher of the of the 19th and early 20th century. One of them, Maddux, he could be, he's up there with Cy Young. Maddux is. It's funny when you were announcing the starting lineup. There was at the back of my head. I was thinking, well, it's either going to be Spahn or Maddux. It's going to be one of those two guys, and you can't go wrong with any of them. And so this pitching staff is when you have a pitching staff and Niekro is in the 5 slot and Glavine is in the bullpen. You're pretty good. I'm not going to complain about this pitching staff either. I like our chances both. With the ball and at the plate. and Lopez, I mean, I've always liked him. I know he's not. He's got to dig against his defense, his arm, but he's Mr. Clutch when it comes to the bat. And a catcher who can hit in the clutch, is a premium. So I'm loving this team.
For my money, and my fandom goes back to 1984. I've never seen a better pitcher live than Greg Maddux.
Yeah, I agree. He is like watching, Picasso paint. I mean, just fun to watch, and not fun in the way that's like, there's a fun and there's a fun. Like, okay, this guy's throwing a great game, but he only struck out 2. Maddux isn't going to strike out 10, but he's going to strike out 5 or 6, and he's going to throw some pitches that are going to make you puzzle in your head. And he's going to hit some corners that are going to make you think he is Picasso or a sniper. And he's fun to watch. I've always enjoyed. I've had the pleasure of seeing him and the other guy who I have to say was a lot of fun to watch live. Not to change the subject, Pedro.
Oh, yeah.
That guy, oh man, he was and again, totally different pitcher, but these were two commanders on the mound. I
Pedro,
mean,
yeah, I would put Pedro in my top 5 again that I've ever seen. I'm not saying ever, but
but yeah, exactly. We've had, because I guess so. I've seen guys in the 70s. I gotta say, Seaver. I saw Seaver pitch against Negro, so those two are up there for me. And trying to think if I never saw Carlton. When I was mostly National League guys, and because I was all those Braves years. But the two best I remember seeing were Seaver and Negro, and then of course, move on up into the 80s and 90s, Maddox by far, Pedro. I don't know who else is your top. Who were some of the top guys that you've seen pitch in person?
off the top of my head, the top 2 actually that I would say in person would be Maddox and Clemens.
Nice, Clemens. Wow.
I mean, let's just take out all the controversy. Clemens was great before it happened.
Yes.
Pedro's in my top 5. I would say because of the fear factor involved, Randy Johnson.
Wow. Yeah.
And then I guess for a 5th, boy, I might have to go maybe Kershaw. I mean, I know he's had his problems in the postseason,
but that's an amazing pitcher.
There's been times in the regular season where he was just
4 or 5 ERA titles in a row. I mean, that guy's amazing. Yeah, that's you've seen. That's a definite Hall of Famer you're seeing there.
Yeah.
That's great, man. We've come along in fortunate times, if you think about it. I sometimes do. I'll take the time. I'll even write occasionally my baseball now. I do a blog. It's called 4 Crickets at WordPress. And there's a lot of baseball stories there that I've written, especially over the last year during COVID, especially during the first half of the year. I was writing a lot of baseball stories. And so if anybody's interested in seeing any of my goofy baseball writing, it's at 4 Crickets, and it's the number spelled out, FOUR Crickets, WordPress blog. And there's a bunch of goofy stuff there. I've done some crazy things. I love Doc Ellis. He was one I enjoyed seeing too, actually. I did get to see him pitch against the Braves. But he, he's famous for a lot of things. He's famous for throwing the no-hitter while on LSD. And that's an amazing feat by itself. But there's some great songs written about him. There are 2 songs written about Doc Ellis, of all people.
If I'm not mistaken, I think there was one written by the Baseball Project.
Okay, yes, indeed. That's exactly right. That's one of them. And Chuck Brodsky is the other. Yep. Chuck is a great baseball writer. And this is something that I don't know how many of our friends listen to Chuck Brodsky or know who he is, but his songs are honored in the Baseball Hall of Fame. They're recognized there. He's written at least 20, 25 baseball songs, most of them funny, some of them touching, like the one about about Dick Allen in Philadelphia, Letters in the Dirt. That was one of his first baseball songs. Great song. Well, one of them happens to be about a player that I made up. So one of his only, I don't know if any of his others are fictional. This one is totally fictional. I made up a player called Splinter Cheeks Johnson, who set the record for consecutive games on the bench. So you have to figure, what kind of ball team is going to keep a guy around for 1,100 consecutive games to do nothing but sit on the bench? Somehow he made the team, never got in the game. And so anyway, I made up this whole goofy story and did a Photoshop of my stupid head, without the beard on an old baseball. It looks pretty good, I have to say. It was one of my better Photoshop jobs. Chuck used it in his album. So if you get the CD, there's a picture of Splinter Cheeks in there. And he wrote a song. He just loved the character. And he says, "Can I write a song?" And I said, "I'd be honored." And like in a couple of days, he had this hilarious story about Splinter Cheeks Johnson, who eventually dies. I told him he dies sleeping in the dugout and he gets hit by an errant foul ball. They all tell him, "Move," but he's asleep. And his baseball cards are worth a nickel. But so anyway, that's Chuck Brodsky. And yeah, urge anybody to look this guy up. Don't look up Splinter Cheeks. Look up Chuck's music. It's any folk, so anything. He can write anything. He's a folk genius, folk music genius.
Yeah, I actually discovered him 2 days ago when reading yesterday's guest, Eric C. Gray's book. He's got 2 albums on iTunes called The Baseball Ballads. He's got a bunch of stuff, but those are the baseball ones.
Yes, he's got great ones on baseball.
So we looked at we have the starting rotation. Let's take a look at the bullpen now.
Yes.
And again, you're going to see some familiar names here. John Smoltz.
Yes.
Craig Kimbrell.
Whoa, yes.
Gene Garber.
Yes.
Mark Wohlers.
Mm-hmm.
Eric O'Flaherty. Rick Camp. You can't leave Rick Camp out.
No, you can't.
And Arodys Vizcaíno. So the reason I put Smoltz in the bullpen was because, it's going to be hard to crack this top 5.
Yes.
And I figure he was as good a closer as he was a starter. So let's make him a closer.
He was, man. That's a great one to have in there. I mean, he led the league in saves, I think, a couple of years. He was a demon in the bullpen. And I'm so glad you got, Kimbrell belongs. I was so upset when Kimbrell left. But I'm so glad he's there. Garber brings me back because, right away, what's the first thing I think of? I think of him stopping Pete Rose in the streak.
Yeah.
But I loved what he was a time when I was listening to a lot of Braves and watching them play. This is a great bullpen, man. You can't go wrong. And I got to see Wohlers get the final out in game 6 of the 95 series, and that was great. It was good to see him do that and nail it down because Tom Glavine had pitched a 1-hitter. I mean, so you've got 2 of my favorite. You got 2 guys who pitched the best game I've ever seen in person pitched. Because I've never seen a no-hitter in person, but I did see a 1-hitter in the World Series, and it was Glavine and Wohlers combining on it against the Yankees in against the Indians in 95. Wishful thinking with the Yankees, who beat the Braves twice in the 90s.
If anyone tonight is watching and they're not familiar with Rick Camp, go to YouTube.
Yes.
July 4th, 1985, I want to say it was. The Braves and Mets played I want to say 19-inning game. It was fireworks night. There was a rain delay. Rick Camp was a relief pitcher for the Braves, and because the Braves ran out of players, Camp hit for himself, hit a home run in like the 17th inning.
Yes.
It's my favorite regular season baseball game of all time.
Wow, that's pretty cool, man.
I was watching that game live. I don't know if I stayed up all night, but I remember watching it. Keith Hernandez hit for the cycle that night.
Wow. When was this, 85?
I think it was 85. July 4th of 85.
I'm trying to think where I was because I remember this game. I remember when it happened. I didn't watch it. I was living in South Carolina. In fact, here's what's funny. This is so weird. This is the kind of symmetry Colonel Bruce would have loved. He was always about things coming together. The Mets and the Braves both had single-A baseball teams in South Carolina. The 2 years I lived there after we got married and left New York, we saw both of those teams play. The Braves single-A team in Sumter and the Mets in Columbus.
Nice.
Or Columbia, South Carolina. But it was cool, yeah. And Mets had by far the better park. But Sumter was it was like one of those 1920s parks. It was kind of cool, wooden and all that stuff. But there was, the people with the Mets were all, that was a pretty cool show. That was our first taste of the minor league baseball show, the showmanship.
I might have to post that game later.
You've got to.
Yeah, I think we will. So, Jerry, we've got a good number of comments and questions for you.
Cool.
We got 2 regulars here tonight, Andrew and Tim. Andrew is saying maybe someday they'll be the Atlanta Hammers. I know that there's pressure to maybe change the team.
I love that, man. That is a great name because I've been thinking the same thing. We can't be Braves forever, and it's ridiculous that it's lasted this long. And the ridiculous logo, I don't think you see it. Well, you see the tomahawk here, but this isn't an official thing. But, that's a great name. I love that. I vote for the Hammers. In fact, I was voting. I thought they should have called Turner Field, Henry Aaron Stadium back in the day. But hey, the statue was cool. It was a good place to meet.
I mean, in Oakland, I mean, the name of that stadium has changed 6 or 7 times in the last 20 years, but the field is actually still referred to as Rickey Henderson Field. I don't know why Atlanta couldn't just say Henry Aaron Field at
I agree.
or whatever it's called.
Yes, yeah, I agree. That's a great suggestion, though. Too, the Atlanta Hammers is terrific.
Tim says the Larry chant at Shea was all out of respect for Mets fans. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when and I tear up when I think about this. In Chipper Jones' last appearance at Shea Stadium, you got to stand and go.
Yes, exactly. That's why it totally gave. I have to say, Tim, I mean, I'm a baseball nerd with the history stuff, and so it really made me feel a connection with my old man who remembers Ebbets Field and Stan Musial going to play against the Dodgers in their den, and the Dodgers cheering, and their enemy, showing him respect, calling him the man. Here comes the man. And this is true. This is the last thing my father and I ever talked about. I mean, this is so weird, but it was Stan Musial and the way the Dodgers fans loved him. He was very sick, and I was glad to hear any of it and talk about it. But that is so cool to see. Yes, it was out of respect. I love that. Mets fans and New York fans in general are pretty knowledgeable. They know who's good.
Yeah. Tim weighs in on the Hall of Fame debate. McGriff and Dale Murphy both belong in the Hall of Fame. I agree.
Yeah, I agree. Hell yes on that.
So Andrew has a question for you, Jerry.
Sure.
Did Kent Herbeck lift Ron Gant off the bag?
I say yes, by God. There's so many things that went wrong for the Braves, and that was still, what was that, 91?
91.
The best. I mean, maybe even though they lost it, this is the thing. It's just an incredible series. I can't. The one that they won was not nearly as interesting a World Series, but my opinion is yes, Herbeck did lift Gant off the bag. I'm still more concerned with Lonnie Smith's inability to run the bases, but that's a whole other story.
So, and again, that's something maybe I'll share later. Chuck Knobloch did a decoy.
Yes.
Lonnie Smith think that there was a double play being turned, so he paused, and that cost him a run and maybe the series.
Yes. It did. I mean, and hats off to Knobloch, who had his own issues later, and so, but showed early on what a sharp ball player he was. Whatever happened later was, some weird mental thing, but he was a pretty smart ball player.
Tim wants to know specifically, despite the outcome, what are your feelings on the Smoltz-Morris Game 7? I've gone on record, it's the greatest baseball game I've ever seen.
I got to say it is. I mean, besides, my personal feelings are, I hate how that series ended, but it still goes down. I think I still stood up and did this in my living room when that game was over. Let's face it, I think we could say that game got Morris into the Hall of Fame. And I'm not one to say he should or shouldn't be in, but that's what you read. And, that's such part of our lore now. That Game 7 is legendary. My feelings are it's a masterpiece. I think I'm with Joey. It's certainly one of the best I've ever seen pitched, maybe the best.
Yeah.
World Series.
So you got a sale tonight here. Tim says, I'm loving these last 2 shows. I'm going to pick this book up for my baseball and Southern rock music loving cousin.
Awesome. Thank you, man. He's a Southern rock loving guy. I think he'll love this book. But thank you, man.
Tell us too, Jerry, real quick, what's the date it's coming out?
It's coming out April 1st is the official, and I'd love that. Here's why it's a perfect date, because it's Colonel Bruce. He was a trickster. He was known for being a trickster. So April 1st is perfect, but it'll come out via University of Georgia Press. So, nice, respected university press. They usually do professorial stuff, but they're trying to do more music, this particular publisher. And Southern music in particular, Tim, there's a subset under in the publishing, in this publishing house for Southern music, basically. And I'm proud that this is one of the first 5 or 6. But anyway, UGA Press, you can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble.
So we have a little technical issue with Jerry. We'll get back to him here in a second. Oh, there you are. All right. So you just froze for just a second
yeah,
there.
I saw that. Sure.
All right. Let's. Tim has some more comments. I know Chipper will be in the lineup versus the Masons this season. Yes, Chipper's going to definitely get some at bats this year. Andrew says when Glavin is your number 6 starter, yeah, look out.
Game winner, I know.
Tim has another question for you, Jerry.
Sure.
Maddox, Glavin, or Smoltz in a must-win game? Who do you go with?
Ooh, I'm going to go with Smoltz. I didn't even have to see you say Smoltz for those big games. Smoltz is and here's the interesting thing. If you decide to go with Maddox or Glavin, you got Smoltz in the bullpen. But I start with Smoltz because I've seen what he does in the postseason. And of those 3, and Glavin's had some great postseasons. Maddox, as we already discussed, has had some trouble. But yeah, I go with Smoltz, man.
So you go with Smoltz, Tim goes with Smoltz, me and Andy go with Maddox. So someone needs to break this tie here.
Ooh, somebody's got to weigh in. Come on, man.
Tim says, I saw Pedro pitch with Boston. Unreal. Yeah, I saw him at Miller Park a couple times, or I get maybe County.
I actually saw him with Montreal at the pitch against the Braves. This was a weird game. Did he pitch 1 or 2 seasons with them, or a couple of seasons?
He actually, I think 3 or 4. He was actually drafted by the Dodgers, and then he went.
He won the Cy Young the year I saw him, and it's one of those games, one of those great games. He struck out like 12, 13. It was just a well-pitched game. What was interesting is my brother, who was a photographer but didn't do a lot of Braves and stuff at that time, he was coming along as a freelancer with me. And he went into the locker room, and he still had his gear with him. He wasn't shooting pictures or anything, but he had his gear. And somebody yelled at him. They threw him out of the Montreal locker room for having camera. Get him out of here! So I haven't let him forget about that since. To this day, I always give him the business. Remember that time you didn't get a chance to meet Pedro? Get him out of here! Well, he can take it. He's 65. He can take it. Pedro was a beast, man. Yeah.
Tim says, I love the joke about Maddox being a poorhouse painter because all he did was paint the corners. Yeah, he was an artist on that bump.
What's that? There's Rick Camp fireworks at 4 a.m. Yes.
I'm definitely posting that game after tonight.
I have friends who are at that game. I mean, because I was in South Carolina, but I think of my friend Mike Ricks, who used to go to a lot of games. And when we were in high school, we used to go to games together. But he might have been at that game, him or his brother, because they were big Braves fans.
Tim says he was 10 when that game happened, and shares that he loves the Stan Musial Brooklyn story. Yeah, it's
great, man.
Yes.
I just love that story too, because Musial, if you haven't read it yet, there's a great, you may have that one by George Vesey from maybe 10 years or so ago, but a Musial biography that's great. But he was just that guy. He'd go to Brooklyn where, some people would quiver because the fans, and Musial was just whatever, boom, double off the wall. And they respected him. But they hated the Cardinals, because that was an arch rival. They wanted to kill the Cardinals. But all right, Stan goes 2 for 4 and we win, that's fine. That's okay. But I love that. And my dad was a Yankees fan, but he lived in Brooklyn. He's seen some Brooklyn games, and he loved Musial, and he even loved some of the Dodgers. That was the funny thing. He was not a Yankees fan who hated the Dodgers, but he hated them during the series. But when he lived in Brooklyn, he loved guys like Newcomb and, of course, Robinson. He used to tell me Robinson stories and all those guys. Furillo, of course, he was Italian too, like us. So he used to say, yeah, Furillo had the best arm, Of course, that's all been borne out. We've heard stories.
Jerry, it's been so fun talking to you. We're gonna promote the heck out of the book tonight and tomorrow. We're gonna try to get you some good sales. I'm sure we'll have you on during the season when the Braves do some really cool things. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing how this lineup does, because there's a bunch of great lineups in this league, man. You've got Utopia to pick from, man. I love it. Every team has a chance. Opening 2 weeks from now. Tomorrow at noon, I can't believe we've gotten this far. Tomorrow at noon is our last team preview show. It's the Texas Rangers with Nate Miller. That's going to be 12 o'clock noon Central Time. And then at 2 o'clock Central, I'll be doing the March Q&A. If anyone has any questions or just wants to know what this is all about, we did one in February. We've brought in over 500 members since then. So tomorrow we got a doubleheader. Nate Miller at noon. Texas Rangers Q&A at 2 o'clock. For Jerry Grillo, I'm Joey Buckholz. Have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow.